Well, hi, Maya. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's start with your background and why you wanted to start Other People's Pockets podcast.
Yeah, well, my background is as a journalist. I was a newspaper reporter for several years, and personal finance and money had always been something I was interested in. But I think I thought of it like on the side, like how you should think about what you eat or whatever, but it's not something I want to focus on. And over time, going into journalism, I always knew that it wasn't a big money maker. I wasn't doing it for the money. And then as I got older, not that I'm old, but as I had a kid and sort of
Life got
started
more
to
expensive.
life got more expensive, and I started to think about the future and what that really looked like for me. And I started to get really frustrated about money and about the income ceiling in newspapers and in how hard it was to get a raise. I asked for raises many times and didn't get them, and then would get them like years later and stuff like that. So it just started to be like, wait a second, like, what is my life going to look like if I keep on this path? And I started to, as I pondered a big career shift, which at first was very hard for me. The letting go of the identity of being a newspaper reporter, that was like, I couldn't even imagine. But I started
Yeah.
to ask people who'd left journalism and who went into all different kinds of fields, things you wouldn't even think of. A lot of people think of going into PR, but I wasn't interested in that. But I interviewed a lot of people, and I always asked them, how much money do you make in your new career? And it was always kind of the most fun thing to hear about because it's just the real deal. And sometimes it was surprising, and I often was like pleasantly surprised, like, oh, good to know that you're making like a lot better money than you were in newspapers.
Yeah.
So I started to just feel like, I wish I could just have these conversations every day. And as I was getting more into personal finance, I was listening to a lot of personal finance podcasts, but I kind of realized that a lot of them don't talk about the actual dollar amounts. They talk about money, around money. They'll talk about a lot of money or not making money, and you're never sure, what does that mean? Or they'll say,
Yeah.
oh, my house was really expensive,
Or like
and it's
percentages, and you're like, I don't know what 20% is because I don't know where we're starting from. Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
it just really annoyed me, I think, maybe as a reporter, but also as a nosy person and someone who tends to be very direct and very literal. I'm just like, what is the number? Like, let's not dance around this. And so I just thought, I really would love to have a podcast where I ask people just literally, how much money do you make?
Yeah.
And also talk about other aspects of their life. Like, it's not just a sort of flat data point, like name, age, money. Okay, moving on. It's like,
Right.
who are you? And like, how
Yeah.
did you get there? And
Or like, did you start with family money? Or are you
yeah,
self-made?
yeah.
Were you part of a startup early on? Yeah, there's always like the context of it matters, right?
Yeah. And even if you're making this money this year, next
Yeah.
year, is it, going to be up and down? Like, I think that there's just so much we can learn from people's individual money stories. And so that's kind of the idea for it. And so now I get to do that, which is really fun.
I love it. You're like a professional nosy person who's getting
Yes.
paid to be, yeah, it's like a perfect career shift. You know
Yeah.
what's cool about this story too, is like, if you have thought about your career transition, like you never would have put that on the board because it's not like a job title that you would, think of, sort of thing. But now
No.
you're a podcaster, I guess, in the more formal sense, but in
Hmm.
in the fun sense. So I love that. I mean, this is like a good career transition story too.
Yeah.
Um, I also think it's great because I can't tell you how many times you've been in like a nice neighborhood. I feel like this happens especially when you're like looking at these like gorgeous homes and you're like, what do these people do for a living? Like that is, I live
Who are
near
these people? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I live near an area where you can like walk on the Strand, which is like people's like beach houses, right? And like, can't even tell you how many times I've walked by people like looking at a house and be like, I wonder what they do for a living. Like this is a
Oh, it's so
universal
funny
thing.
because that was like another idea that I had either as like an offshoot of the show or even another show. And it would be called Who the Fuck Lives in That House?
Yeah,
And
I
you would
love
pick
that.
like certain houses, or you would have listeners send in like, there's this house in my
Yeah.
neighborhood. And we wouldn't necessarily have to identify
Yeah.
depending on people's privacy levels, but we could just be like, I'm just going to say that there's this house in Boston that's blue and like has this crazy whatever. And so we knocked on the door and like got these people to tell us about their lives. And yeah, exactly. I mean, I think like you always peer inside, especially when you can see people like the lights on and people are in there and you're just like,
yeah,
what,
like,
how does that all come together?
Yeah.
And I really think of I think of my podcast a little bit like Zillow, in the sense of like, we all are obsessed with Zillow. We like to look at the actual interiors of other people's houses. When we have a friend and we find out where they live, we like look it up on Zillow to see how much it's worth and like, oh, what does the bathroom actually look like, right? And so I think in the same way, we're curious about other people's finances. Like, let's actually look inside. Like, what are the mistakes they've made? What are oh, they make this much money, but they actually have a ton of debt. Oh, okay. Like, it rounds out the picture, not to judge people, but to be curious and to be like, okay, this is the reality, instead of us all just living in darkness and silence and feeling like we can't talk about it.
I'm curious, when you were having these career transition conversations with people, so you're trying to get out of journalism, this is before you started the podcast, and you would ask people how much they make. I think that's so good, but I'm curious, what was their reaction? Like, were they open to sharing that number, or were most people sort of like, ooh. I mean,
I think it depended. Some
like
people
maybe on your relationship with them.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I didn't have a relationship with them. It was like, hi, I'm on LinkedIn. I am.
Sometimes that makes it easier though to share that information too.
Because they're like, I don't know who you are. Yeah, it depends. Some people were open. Some people were like, let me give you a range, or let me just like, I'll just say that my bonus, like even just my bonus is more than what I ever made in journal, or like they would say stuff like that. But yeah, I think it, like, if I let them know, like, I'm asking this because I'm really doing this personal reporting project for myself. And I'm really just trying to find my way and figure out like, what is this world out there? What is available to me? What should I be thinking about? So, if you're not comfortable sharing, I totally understand. But it's just really helpful for me, because part of what I'm trying to do is make more money. And so it's just really helpful for me to learn like the reality. And so sometimes with that, people would share or ask me not to repeat it, but there's other people that are like, I'll just tell you, so it's kind of fun to see what people's reaction will be.
Well, like I said, I love that, because I think it's good inspiration for anyone who's thinking about making a career pivot, wants to have those informational interviews, maybe bored in their current job and just wants to start exploring. It's like, it's okay to ask that question. And in fact, sometimes it's much more comfortable when you are a stranger to somebody. So
yeah,
you all have permission. Please don't be afraid. Okay, so let's get back to you being nosy about people's finances. What have been some of the big takeaways? Your show, you interview a whole variety of people, but like, what have been some of the takeaways of the people who really have it? Like, there's this saying of like, people who really have it don't feel the need to show it. Like, there's these like stereotypical phrases that you've heard your whole life, like keeping up with the Joneses, like that person who has to show it is really struggling. So like, what have you actually found to be true when you think about those common phrases or stereotypes, really?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that, one thing is kind of, I don't know if this is even a phrase, but like, money begets money, in the sense of like, I talked to this financial therapist and I asked her, like, basically she's what many people might think of as a normal, like, psychologist, like therapist, but she focuses on money issues. And so
that's so amazing.
Her name is Barry Tessler. The episode's actually not out yet, but I was like, do financial therapists make more than normal therapists? And she was like, I think they probably do, because I think when you're helping people with their money, it's similar to if you're a business coach, like, versus another kind of coach, or like on the other end of a spectrum, like a social worker, which you could construe as being a kind of coach, or like you're helping someone, right? But when you're helping someone with their business or with their money, you get paid more because you're going to help that person make more money. And so there's this just weird thing, when you're in the money space, you can make more money, which like, I don't feel great about, because I also feel like social workers should make more money, but there's that. And then like, I think that people who the people who I've spoken to who have their own business of some sort, it is a way to unlock more money opportunities. It just is. I mean, having a traditional job is great, and there's nothing wrong with it, especially if you're happy in that. But yeah, there is something about having your own business, and not to say everyone should go out and start their own business, because you do need there are also a lot of small businesses that fail, but like I think that plus finding your niche, like finding a niche that is pretty specific. Like I talked to a financial dominatrix who has a whole practice just berating people online, and then they send her money because their kink is losing their, or giving someone their money, giving a hot woman online their money. There's no sexual contact, there's no sex that happens. And that's a niche. And like, and she, even within FinDom, within financial domination, has created her whole like identity. And so yeah, it's kind of finding that like thing that only you can do, that seems so specific, and yet that can like open up more opportunity for yourself.
So the people you've interviewed who have the highest salaries or like highest income, they've been business owners. They've worked for themselves.
Yes. Well, there's one person, Cord Jefferson, who is a Hollywood writer. He's written on Succession and Watchmen and stuff that you may have seen. So he, I guess what would you call him? I think that he's like his own person, but he like has this big multi-million-dollar deal with Warner Brothers.
Mhm.
I don't know if he's considered an employee for them, but
Yeah.
yeah, but other than yeah, probably other than that, yeah, I would say it's solo biz owners pretty much. That yeah, and
Wow.
not exclusively, but it gives you more like flexibility and like more range to kind of lean into who you are, versus my identity and my worth is attached to being part of this other brand, this big company, and I have to go along with what they want.
I mean, that's sort of this like magical combination, right? Of like, I get to kind of have my cake and eat it too. Like, I'm not 100% the freelancer taking all the risk over here, or the entrepreneur who's like full risk, but I'm also not like in the full corporate, hamster wheel of the office politics and this and that. So I mean, that's a good spot if you can get it. I'm sure there's
Yeah.
obviously few careers out there. I'm really curious to the financial therapist. I think that's interesting because I'm sure you've started to uncover this as well. People have weird things about money, and it starts really early in life.
Yep.
Like, they spend it all, they don't spend any of it. Like, there's the extremes. What are you learning about that? I mean, it totally makes sense why there's like financial therapists. I at first, when you said it too, I thought, oh, this is a woman who works with people who have like their thing is, their hang up is that they need help like with money, not necessarily like the actual like management of their money, but sort of their like emotions around money.
Oh yeah, and it definitely is. It is that. But then it's also like some of the practical stuff. Yeah, I think that a lot of us grow up with a feeling of, first of all, you're not supposed to talk about money. Or if you do, only with like super, super close people you're very comfortable with, that it can divide people, that it's a little bit like, if you saw suddenly everybody at your workplace with their bathing suit on, it's just like,
Yeah.
it's like TMI. It's just like, it's like, we didn't need to know that. And then there's a lot of shame around not having enough, or that like I think that I felt this for sure. And this was like a driver of the early days, even before I started the podcast, of just like, what did I miss? Like,
Yeah.
why do I feel like this doesn't add up for me? Why do I feel like I can't afford certain things? And like, so there's this message out there that like, if you don't make enough money, like you are too stupid to not figure it out.
Like it's, yeah. Or I would say also the other thing I feel like happens is like, you look around and you're like, what am I doing wrong? Because like, or maybe your household does have like a decent household income, and you're like, how are we not able to like do what they're doing? Like, how did they
Yeah.
afford to do what they're doing? Like, there's no way they make more. Like, there is this feeling of sort of like somehow a bus left the station. You were not even
On it.
told where the station was.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
exactly. And I mean, I think that it goes to the larger forces in our economy that we need to think about, of like the squeezing of the middle class, and how, like, yeah, it is crazy that you can have a dual income household with people making decent incomes, and it for not to not feel like enough, or you can't afford a house comfortably or whatever. Like, that is a problem that is not your fault. But it does feel like it's your fault. And so that's something that comes up a lot. And then yeah, just feeling kind of there's sometimes this like thing that people can't put their finger on. Like, they don't know what it is that like is making them feel weird talking about money. And I often ask people, like, tell me about your feelings. Like, tell me about what feels weird about this. So yeah, and I think it does come down to, like, when you don't have practice talking about a certain topic, it really is almost like speaking a different language. Like, if you just don't have practice speaking Japanese, even if you know a few words, it's like weird to get the words out because it's just not something you do every day.
Yeah. What have been some of the takeaways about kind of what you're saying about financial literacy? Like, have you had some really specific, tangible takeaways where you're like, if we had more financial literacy or like training, this thing wouldn't happen, or people would be more okay with salary transparency? Or, I think also about the fact that like a lot of people use money to fill certain voids. And it's like, how do
Mm.
you recognize when you're using your money to fill a void versus using the money to do something you actually enjoy? Like, there's not a lot of language or like tools, especially for adults. Hopefully the kids now will maybe get some of that, but like there aren't a lot of tools about that. That's so like where do we go from there so we don't just continue a cycle of this quote unquote keeping up with the Joneses feeling?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. I think my hope is that when people talk more openly about this, they'll realize like the reality of other people's situation, and that they're not so alone. Like I think I mentioned, like, there's some super high earners, but then they'll have a lot of debt too, and like, just to realize that that is part of the equation. But um wait, sorry, your question was like, how do we break away from like using money to fill a void?
Well, no, just more about,
Yeah.
I mean, I wish we could answer that. I don't know if we'll be able to answer that. But I was thinking more about like financial literacy. Like, what do we
Yes.
need on like, what are some tangible things that we could do for us listening related to financial literacy that might help us with this, especially knowing that like we're not going to make those feelings probably go away. You can't just turn it on and off of like that comparison feeling, or that feeling of
Mhm.
like, what am I doing wrong?
Yeah. Well, I think that in terms of like educating yourself, like in terms of getting a raise, for example, I think you need to do a lot of research, which often involves actually talking to real live human beings. And whether that's people on LinkedIn, whether that's people at your job, um, you should definitely be talking to the white men who have either had your job in the past or have it now. Don't just talk to other people that look, if you're a woman, say, that look exactly like you, because you want to find out what the white men are being paid, right?
Yeah.
And often it's easy to talk to maybe someone who's left your job, who's not at your organization, because then they don't have a stake as much. They don't care. They're fine talking about it. But really, like, put together a dossier where like, I've talked to 5 people or 10 people. Like, I know what I should be getting paid. I know what's out there. It could even be people at other organizations, but that do similar work to what you do. And knowing like it's not about going on Glassdoor, although that's a okay resource, but I have just noticed on Glassdoor, there's a lot of inaccurate information. And when you think about where they're getting their information, it's people submitting it to them. So who's
Yeah.
submitting stuff to Glassdoor? It might tend to be people who are not getting paid enough, who are frustrated with their pay. They're interested in going on Glassdoor. It's not people who are like, I'm killing it. Life
Yeah.
is good. I want to go on Glassdoor. Like, they're not getting the data. So like, yeah, in journalism reporting, it's that like, actual human intelligence. It's not internet research often. So like, I think that's a big thing, is like, you'd be surprised if you actually talk to people. And then I think part of the like you talked about, like how to like deal with the hurt feelings or the awkwardness about hearing other people's numbers. Like, I think just like the more you do it, the more you have these conversations with friends. Again, I try to like turn a curious eye toward things that make me feel anxious. And of course, I always have judgments. I always have reactions of like, oh my God, this person makes so much money. But like, if there's a way for you to like be like, huh, like, let's just be curious about that. That's interesting. I did not know that you could make that much money in this field, instead of feeling like, oh, like this person, like, it's just ridiculous. What, like, instead of like stopping the conversation there, just be like, honestly, like, it's kind of interesting to hear all these data points. And the more you can do that in your own life, I think that contributes to your own like salary literacy and understanding like, this is what's out there. And then I'm sure you're also wondering about like just personal finance literacy. I don't know if that's what you're getting at too.
Well,
But
I think to just build off of your last
yeah.
point, which I think is really cool, is I was thinking too, for someone who is feeling right now, like, let's just use even numbers of like, I make 50,000. There's no way I will ever be a person who has a job that pays me 250,000. Like, one, having some optimism and approaching that with curiosity, but like, what would be some tips for somebody who, I mean, it kind of sounds like
Who
that's sort
feels
of
like that.
the journey you went on. So maybe we
Yeah.
could provide some tips, because I think there are a lot of people who might be self-limiting themselves or just assume
Yes.
like that's too big of a jump, like you must
Yeah.
have
I
to be,
totally felt that way. Yeah.
yeah, okay. So give us your
Totally.
tips.
Yeah. I mean, I have made I think the least amount I made was like $38,000 a year. And then I've made 40, I've made 50, I've made 100,000, and more. Um, and yeah, I think so. Someone who's like in a job making 50K and is like, there's no way I'll ever make really that much more. I would say like there's a few things. Like, one is there is the reality of your industry. And so it could be that you're in an industry like newspapers, for example, where, yeah, honestly, there is kind of a ceiling. Aside from some crazy superstars who like maybe they also have a contract on TV and so they're making TV money or whatever. They write
Right.
books and they've written, stuff that's been made into movie. Like, yes, there are unicorns, but yes, you have to be realistic about like, is my industry one in which it is realistic for me to make more money? Yes or no? And it does suck to feel like I might have to leave my industry. But and I'm not saying, well, yeah, you're gonna have to, but I think just some reality check on that is important. And then also realizing like there are other things, like there are plenty of people and people I've interviewed who like started a side hustle, which obviously is easier when you're younger and maybe have fewer responsibilities, but started a side hustle that did turn into a big business. And then, also thinking about like, I think it's important. I'm really interested in people who've made big pivots in their careers and have
Yeah.
pivoted to something like, God, no one would have ever thought that that's even a thing. And so to realize that your job or your skills, whatever you're passionate about, say like you are a public school teacher or something, like those skills and what you get out of teaching, what you like about it, right now you're in whatever job and that's great, but it is possible that you can use those skills and get that same feeling you get in something else that maybe makes more money. There are a lot of people who remix their skills. And I think it's also like, I had a lot of complicated feelings about leaving newspapering because it was like, I mean, if anything, we need more journalists in the world. We don't need, more people to leave the industry. But I also thought about like, I know a lot of public defenders, and that's also a job that is like high burnout rate. It tends to be something people do when they're younger. There are some people who are lifers in that position, but it's really common to be a public defender and do that for a few years and then move on to like a whole host of other things, including maybe corporate law or being a judge or whatever. And like, I don't know, I can't speak for that profession, but my sense is there's like an acceptance around like, yeah, like you can't do this job forever. So I think it's okay to have certain things where you do it for a certain amount of time and like, you're not a horrible person for leaving it and pivoting to something else.
Yeah.
So I think I would just say that like, just really try to keep an open mind and talk to people who've left or talk to people who seem to have like remixed their skills, and you'll be surprised at how like there could be other opportunities out there for you. But yes, it might take a leap. It might take not just like staying on this like path that is more known.
And then, of course, listen to other people's pockets, and then you can hear more of the context about how people are, like what they're making, but then like how they made that money, or what, you know, more of the background of it that you're not going to get maybe in your like 20-minute informational interview conversation.
Sure. Yeah.
I just want to wrap up by saying, you know, what's one thing you've been surprised by having these conversations on other people's pockets? Like maybe a misconception you went in with that you're being proven wrong about, anything that's been a shocker.
Yeah, something that's been surprising, and we talk about this on one of the episodes where we take a step back and sort of unpack some of the things we're learning about money. One thing is it's happened a few times where like we pre-screen people to come on the show. You know, we tell them this is what the show's about. The heart of the show is finding out what people make. Are you in or are you out? Like, is this a good fit or not? So they're, you know, obviously the people coming on know what it's about. They're generally okay sharing their numbers, but then sometimes they're totally okay with sharing all these different aspects of their personal finances, but not what socioeconomic class they consider themselves a part of. And that is something I found really interesting, because in some ways I would think like your class is just like, it's just like some label, like it's so broad, you know, it's like, doesn't matter. Like it's not even that specific to you, you know? But we talked to this expert about that, and she was just pointing out like, you know, class is so much more than finances. You know, you could be in one class spiritually, but another class financially, or you may have come from a working class background, but now you're upper middle class, and you actually just don't identify as upper middle class. Working class people, that's your roots. Those are your people. Those are your values. Like it's actually really important to you to hold on to that identity. And so you feel like if you say upper middle class, like people just have an assumption about what that means. And, you know, they'll dismiss you, or, you know, so that has been really interesting, that like, that is kind of a touchy, I think it's touchy because maybe it is such a big identifier that, like, yeah, even when I, say that, like, I was actually interviewed for the show. It has not come out yet, but there's going to be an episode on my personal finances. And I was asked about, you know, my upbringing. And I said, I think I was upper middle class, in part because I remember my mom saying that at one point, and I just didn't question it. And I've never questioned it. I don't even know if she's correct. Maybe we were middle class. Like, I don't know. But even that, like it, like I know that like that lands on some people's ears a certain way. And everyone wants to say they're middle class. Everyone, either upper middle class, or if, like, I don't know, maybe not ever, but most people want to be like, I'm solidly middle class. You know, that's like the acceptable. Like,
well, maybe there's this feeling of like, if I say I'm upper middle class, can I hold on to it? You know, maybe there's this feeling for some people where they're like, I'm only, some years I am and some years I'm not.
Totally. And there's a ton of like treading water that you do that my family did. Like my parents got divorced, and at one point my mom had her own business and was not making a lot of money, was making like $12,000 a year, and was putting everything on credit cards. And like we barely held on to our house. And there's this treading water you do. You're like, I've got to keep this up. Like now it's even harder to keep this all up because you know it's cost so much. So
lifestyle creep is a real thing. Where like as you said, money begets money. It's like the more money you make, the more money you spend, and people just get in this like, I mean, golden handcuffs. Like these are not new concepts. They've been around for a while, but that is really interesting that people are sort of willing to share how much the salary, but maybe less the class, because there's so much more that goes into that. And also, I kind of understand, because there is a lot of stereotyping that goes around it. Like, it feels like a much better story to be the rags to riches kind of vibe than the like riches to riches vibe.
Right.
So,
Of course.
you especially depending on like if you're relying on that like commonality with somebody else, or having to identify with that. That's very interesting.
But the thing is, even when it's like quote unquote riches to rags, there's still like, I'm sorry, rags to riches. There's still like no, don't think of me as riches. Like,
yeah, totally.
Like I still kind of want to be
I'm
seen.
still humble.
Yes. I don't want my friends from home to hear this and hate me. Like,
right.
There's just still this like, I mean, some people are like, and I made it, like whatever, but there's other people that are like, I feel awkward about my situation, even though I'm doing well. I just like, I don't want people to think of me a certain way.
Money changes you, right?
Yeah.
Like if you make a lot of money, it changes who you are. And maybe some people don't want that to be true. I also think there's so many, like, think of like the movies and the documentaries of these people who get rich and then bad stuff happens, or crazy stuff happens, or like you like forget who you are and your upbringing and your values. And so I can understand also a little bit wanting to stay away from it, because it's like that does make the good Hollywood TV. So like when you think of that stereotype, you're like, ooh, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to be.
And I think that people want to be relatable.
Yes. Yeah, totally.
Like, I think people's deepest desire on some level is to be relatable and to be liked and to be like, oh yeah, you're cool. Like, you're one of us. And like the thing is with money, there's no way you can be one of us with everyone. Like,
right.
Everyone makes like a different amount. And so some people are going to be like, oh, you're relatable. Some people are like, oh, you make so much money. And so, yeah, it's just this weird thing.
Well, it's interesting how people want to be relatable no matter, it's like the people pleasing piece of us of like, I want to be relatable no matter who I'm talking to, whether I'm talking to the person who's like super wealthy. I want to make sure they know like I'm worth talking to. But then the person who is maybe less, they're like, but I want to be relatable to you as well. It's an interesting thing that's really interesting. And I mean, clearly the feelings around money is not just what's in your bank account. It's also like a worth, a representation. To your point, it would be so fun if people like walked around with this like imaginary number up on their head that was like, here's my net worth. You know what I mean? But also people would hate it, because to your point,
it's reductive. It's like we shouldn't only be our numbers too.
Exactly. So. We're trying, and like us as a society, I think we are trying very hard to not have our worth connected to like our job titles, the number in our bank account. And it's this like big backpedal against like capitalism. So this is complicated stuff for a lot of very important reasons. Well, thank you for doing the important work of getting nosy on other people's pockets and talking to them. I'll link to the show obviously in the show notes, and but yeah, anywhere else where people can find you and follow you and maybe set up an informational interview and ask you how much you make. I'm just kidding.
Oh yeah, that's fine. I mean, I wouldn't be anywhere without the informational interviews that I have done with other people. So Other People's Pockets is available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you like us, please consider leaving a review. And I am on Twitter at Maya Lau, MAYALAU, and on TikTok and Instagram at It's Maya Money. And I would love for people to get in touch and let me know what you think of the show.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.